My parents dragged me to court over my inheritance, but the judge's strange stare exposed 50 years' family secret I was never meant to learn. My parents smirked when I entered the courtroom. But the judge looked at me like he knew me. My name is Isabella, and I'm 28 years old. For most of my life, I believed I was unwanted, abandoned by parents who valued status over love, forgotten by a grandfather I barely knew. I survived on freelance design work in a cramped Brooklyn apartment, barely making rent, when a lawyer's call turned my world upside down. My estranged grandfather had left me everything, and suddenly, the parents who hadn't spoken to me in a decade were back, this time with lawyers, accusations, and a courtroom battle that would expose secrets buried for nearly 50 years. But when the judge walked in and looked at me like he knew me, I realized this inheritance was about to reveal far more than money. It was about to uncover the truth of who I really am. My parents, Charles and Linda Grant, were the kind of people who measured worth in dollar signs and social status. When I was 15, I overheard them at a dinner party laughing about my grandfather Edward's crazy old ways and how he'd wasted his fortune on sentimental nonsense. That night, something broke inside me. By 18, I'd left their world behind, and they'd let me go without a fight. So when my phone rang that Tuesday morning with a call from Whitmore and Associates, a law firm in Manhattan, I assumed it was a wrong number. Miss Isabella Grant? The voice was professional, almost rehearsed. Speaking. I'm calling regarding the estate of Edward Grant. I'm sorry to inform you that your grandfather passed away 2 weeks ago. My breath caught. I hadn't seen Edward since I was a child, those few stolen moments when my parents weren't watching. I remembered his kind eyes, the way he'd slip me books about art and architecture when no one was looking. I didn't know. Miss Grant, you've been named as the primary beneficiary of his estate. We need you to come to our office as soon as possible. The world tilted. Primary beneficiary, that couldn't be right. My parents had always told me Edward wanted nothing to do with me, that he'd sided with them when I left. 2 days later, I sat in a sleek conference room overlooking Central Park, my thrift store blazer feeling painfully out of place. Mr. Turner, a silver-haired man with gentle eyes, slid an envelope across the mahogany table. Before we begin the official reading, your grandfather left this for you personally. My hands trembled as I opened it. The handwriting was shaky but deliberate. To the granddaughter I truly knew, Isabella, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and I can only pray you'll forgive an old man's cowardice. I watched you from afar all these years. Your art shows your small victories, your beautiful resilience. You became everything I hoped you would despite your parents' cruelty. I was weak when it mattered most. I should have fought for you, but I let them poison the well. They told me you never wanted to see me, just as they told you I'd rejected you. By the time I learned the truth, years had passed, and I was too ashamed to reach out. This inheritance isn't about money, Isabella. It's about giving you the freedom to finally live the life you deserve. You are the only one in this family who carries my true legacy, integrity. With all my love, Grandfather Edward. Tears blurred the words. He'd known, all this time, he'd known. The door burst open. My mother swept in wearing Chanel, my father close behind in his tailored suit. They were late, as always, making an entrance. Linda's eyes landed on me, and her lips curved into that familiar, condescending smile. Isabella, what a surprise. Her tone suggested it was anything but pleasant. Charles barely acknowledged me, taking his seat with the confidence of someone who'd never been denied anything. Mr. Turner cleared his throat. Now that everyone's here, let's proceed. The last will and testament of Edward Grant, dated March 15, 2025. I watched my parents' faces as Turner read. Their smug expressions held steady through the initial formalities, the charitable donations, the small bequests to staff. Then came the main clause. I hereby leave the entirety of my remaining estate, including all properties, assets, and holdings of the Grant Corporation, to my granddaughter, Isabella Marie Grant, as sole beneficiary. The silence was deafening. Linda's gasp cut through it like a knife. Charles's face turned a dangerous shade of red, his jaw clenching so hard I could hear his teeth grind. This is absurd, my father finally managed, his voice low and venomous. The old man was clearly incompetent. I assure you, Mr. Grant, your father was of sound mind. We have multiple physicians' attestations, video recordings of the signing. I don't care what you have. Charles stood abruptly. We'll be contesting this. Linda grabbed my arm as I tried to leave, her manicured nails digging into my skin. You manipulated him. You always were good at playing the victim. I pulled free, my voice steadier than I felt. I hadn't seen him in 20 years, Mother. You made sure of that. Fix this, Linda hissed at Charles as I walked away. I will not let that ungrateful brat. We will, he promised darkly. In court outside, Mr. Turner caught up with me on the sidewalk. Miss Grant, I need to warn you. Your parents will fight this aggressively. They've already indicated they'll claim incompetence and possible forgery. Can they win? His hesitation told me everything. With enough money and the right lawyers, it's possible. But your grandfather anticipated this. He built a strong case. That night, alone in my apartment, I reread Edward's letter a dozen times. I thought about the book he'd sent me when I was 16, a beautiful volume on the Renaissance masters. My parents had found it and thrown it away, but not before I'd memorized every page. He'd seen me, really seen me, and I'd spent 10 years thinking I was alone. The memory hit me like a wave, sitting in my childhood bedroom, hearing my parents laugh downstairs about Edward's sentimental foolishness, the isolation I'd felt believing even my grandfather thought I was worthless. It had all been lies. I made a decision then, staring at Edward's shaky signature. They'd taken my childhood, my family, my sense of belonging. But they wouldn't take this, not because of the money, though God knew I could use it, but because this was Edward's final gift, his way of saying I'd mattered all along. They took everything from me once, I whispered to the empty room. Not again. The court summons arrived the next morning. My parents had already filed. Their lawyer's name made my stomach drop, Victoria Hale, famous for destroying opponents in inheritance disputes. But it was the judge's name that made me pause, Henry Whitaker. Something about it felt strangely familiar, though I couldn't place why. The New York County Courthouse loomed like a marble fortress, its columns seeming to judge me before I'd even entered. My thrift store suit felt like armor made of paper as I climbed the steps, each one heavier than the last. Inside, reporters lined the hallways. The story had leaked, estranged daughters sued by parents for fortune. Their cameras flashed as I passed, questions pelting me like hail. Isabella, did you manipulate your grandfather? How does it feel to steal from your own parents? I kept my head down, Mr. Turner's hand steady on my elbow, guiding me through. The courtroom was everything I'd seen in movies, but somehow worse. High ceilings that made every whisper echo, wooden benches that creaked with judgment, and at the front, an empty judge's bench that seemed to loom over everything. My parents sat on the opposite side with their lawyer. Victoria Hale was exactly what I'd expected, sharp suit, sharper eyes, the kind of woman who could smell weakness from across a room. But it was my parents who made my chest tighten. They looked so confident, so sure of their victory. Linda caught my eye and leaned toward Charles, whispering something that made them both smirk. She spoke just loud enough for me to hear. You always did like attention, didn't you, dear? I focused on breathing, in, out. Don't let them see you shake. All rise for the Honorable Judge Henry Whitaker. We stood as one, and the judge entered. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe late 40s, with silver threading through dark hair and eyes that held a strange weight, like someone who'd seen more than they wanted. Those eyes swept the courtroom, professional and detached, until they landed on me. He froze just for a heartbeat, but I saw it. His expression shifted, not quite recognition, but something close, familiarity, confusion. Then, just as quickly, the mask returned, and he took his seat. Please be seated. That moment haunted me through Victoria's opening statement. She painted me as a predator who'd exploited a dying man's loneliness, who'd somehow manipulated someone I hadn't seen in decades into rewriting his will. Her words were surgical, designed to cut deep. Your Honor, the evidence will show that Edward Grant was suffering from dementia in his final months, That he was isolated, vulnerable, and that Miss Isabella Grant took advantage of that vulnerability for financial gain. Mr. Turner's counter was passionate but felt like shouting into a hurricane. Your Honor, we have notarized documents, video recordings, multiple witnesses attesting to Mr. Grant's mental clarity. This is a case of a grandfather rectifying years of family estrangement, not manipulation. We challenge the validity of those documents, Victoria interjected smoothly. Our medical experts will demonstrate, then let's see your evidence, Turner shot back. Judge Whittaker's gavel came down. We'll review all evidence in due order. Court is adjourned until Monday. The media circus outside was worse. By evening, my face was everywhere. My inbox flooded with messages, most of them cruel. Gold digger, you should be ashamed, your parents deserve that money, not some ungrateful brat. I sat on my apartment floor scrolling through the hatred when my phone rang. A name I hadn't seen in years, Nora Chin. Please tell me you're not reading those comments. Her familiar voice said. Nora, we'd been inseparable as kids before my parents decided her family wasn't suitable for our social circle. I'm a journalist now. I've been following your case. She paused. Bella, I want to help. There are things about your family, about your grandfather, that I think you need to know. What kind of things? Meet me tomorrow. There's a coffee shop on Bleecker. And Bella, don't trust anyone from your grandfather's estate. I've heard whispers that someone on the inside has been feeding information to your parents. When Monday came, Victoria brought her first weapon, a medical report claiming Edward had scored poorly on cognitive tests in his final months. The doctor who'd administered them testified via video, his credentials impressive, his demeanor unshakable. But something nagged at me. The signature on the report, I'd seen Edward's handwriting in his letter. The flourish on the G was different, slightly off. Your Honor, I whispered urgently to Mr. Turner. That signature, not now, he hissed back. But I saw his eyes narrow as he looked at the document again. During a recess, Judge Whittaker caught my attention. He was studying me with that same strange expression from the first day, like he was trying to solve a puzzle. Miss Grant, a question, if I may. His voice was carefully neutral. Did you ever meet your grandfather's second wife? I blinked, confused. Your Honor, my grandfather was a widower. My grandmother died when my father was young. Something flickered across his face. I see. My apologies. I must have been mistaken. But he didn't look mistaken. He looked troubled. That evening, Nora and I met at the coffee shop. She slid a folder across the table, her expression grim. Your grandfather was investigating something before he died, something about your father, embezzlement, fraud, I'm not sure. But he kept detailed records, and someone tried to destroy them after his death. Who? That's what I'm trying to find out. But Bella, there's more. Your grandfather had a nurse years ago, a woman named Margaret Whittaker. She disappeared under mysterious circumstances. The name hit me like ice water. Whittaker, like the judge. I thought it was strange too. I'm looking into it. My phone buzzed, an email from an unknown sender, no message, just an attachment. I opened it, and the air left my lungs. It was a will, another will, dated 5 years before the one that named me as heir. And this one left everything to someone named Margaret Whittaker. I couldn't sleep. The scanned image of that old will burned behind my eyelids every time I closed them. Margaret Whittaker, the name connected to both a missing nurse and the judge presiding over my case. It couldn't be coincidence. By dawn, I'd made a decision. Nora met me at the public library, both of us armed with laptops and determination. Start with Edward's employment records, Nora suggested, her journalist instincts kicking in. If Margaret worked for him, there'll be a paper trail. 3 hours and countless dead ends later, we found her, Margaret Ann Whittaker, employed as Edward Grant's private nurse from 1978 to 1982. The records ended abruptly, no resignation, no termination notice, just nothing. Look at this, Nora pointed to her screen. Birth records. Margaret had a son in 1979. Father listed as unknown. When was Judge Whittaker born? Nora's fingers flew across the keyboard. Her face went pale. 1979. Same year. The implications crashed over me like a wave. If Margaret was Edward's nurse, if she had a son the same year, if that son was now the judge, he could be Edward's son, I whispered. My uncle, which would mean he's biased. He'd have to recuse himself. Nora grabbed my hand. Bella, if you reveal this, it could delay your case for months, give your parents time to build a stronger case against you. Or he's already biased in their favor, I countered. What if he knows? What if he's angry that Edward left everything to me instead of acknowledging him? You don't know that. You saw how he looked at you. That wasn't anger. She was right. Judge Whittaker's expression had been confusion, maybe even recognition, but not hostility. That night, I retrieved a storage key Mr. Turner had given me, access to Edward's personal effects that hadn't been catalogued in the estate. The storage unit was dusty and cramped, filled with boxes of old papers and forgotten memories. In the corner, I found a trunk, locked. It took 20 minutes and a YouTube tutorial to pick the lock, my hands shaking the entire time. Inside, beneath yellowed newspapers and old photographs, I found a leather-bound diary. Edward's handwriting filled the pages, entries spanning decades. I flipped through carefully, looking for anything about Margaret, and then I found it, dated June 1979. I watched him today through the hospital window. My son, Margaret named him Henry, a strong name. I cannot claim him publicly. The scandal would destroy everything. But I've arranged for his care, his education. Margaret understands. She must disappear for both their safety. My wife suspects, and her family's influence could ruin them both. I am a coward. I choose reputation over fatherhood. God forgive me. My hands trembled. Judge Henry Whittaker was Edward's son, my uncle. And he didn't know, or at least he hadn't known until recently. The next entries were heartbreaking. Edward's secret monitoring of Henry's life, his pride in his son's achievements, his guilt over the secret, and then, dated just 2 months before his death, I've learned Henry became a judge. I wanted to reach out 1,000 times, but how do you tell a man his entire life is based on a lie? I failed him. I failed Isabella. Perhaps in death, I can give them both what I couldn't in life, truth and security. I closed the diary, tears streaming down my face. Edward had carried this secret for 46 years. The question was, did Judge Whittaker know? In court the next day, I studied him carefully, his reactions, his expressions, the way his jaw tightened whenever Edward's name was mentioned. He was fighting something, emotion, maybe, or recognition of things he didn't want to acknowledge. Mr. Turner was presenting our case systematically, but Victoria kept interrupting with procedural challenges. My parents sat smugly, Linda occasionally glancing at me with barely concealed contempt. Your Honor, Turner said, I'd like to introduce testimony from witnesses who can attest to Mr. Grant's mental state in his final months. Objection, Victoria called. The defense plans to introduce a witness who will testify that the plaintiff manipulated Mr. Grant through emotional blackmail. Emotional blackmail? I couldn't help myself. I hadn't seen him in 20 years. Judge Whittaker's gavel came down. Miss Grant, please refrain from outbursts. But his eyes held something, sympathy, understanding. Miss Hale, you'll have your opportunity to present witnesses. Mr. Turner, proceed. During recess, my phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. I have information about your grandfather. Meet me at Café Lucia at 7 p.m. Come alone. Hey, Clean, I showed Nora. Her face lit up. Emily Clean. She was Edward's housekeeper for 30 years. If anyone knows the family secrets, it's her. The cafe was nearly empty when I arrived. An elderly woman with kind eyes and silver hair waved me over. Mrs. Clean looked exactly like someone who'd spent decades caring for others, warm, sturdy, trustworthy. Miss Isabella, she took my hands. You look just like your grandmother. Edward showed me pictures. Mrs. Clean, why did you want to meet? Because your parents are lying, and someone needs to say it. Her voice was firm despite her age. I saw your mother burning letters years ago, stacks of them. Letters Edward had written to you, birthday cards, Christmas presents. She threw them all in the fireplace and told me if I said anything, she'd have me fired and ensure I never worked again. My chest constricted. He tried to reach me. Every year, dear. Every single year after you left, your mother intercepted everything. She pulled out her phone, showing me photos she'd secretly taken of the letters before they were destroyed. I kept records. I was afraid, but I couldn't let her erase you completely. Why come forward now? Because I'm old, and I'm tired of carrying their secrets. And because Edward made me promise, if they ever tried to take what he'd given you, I was to help you fight back. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small box. He left this for you. I was supposed to give it to you after the will reading, but your parents' lawyer tried to prevent me from contacting you. Inside the box were more letters, photographs of Edward watching me at my high school graduation from a distance, at my first art show. He'd been there, hidden in the crowds, witnessing the moments he couldn't share. And at the bottom, a USB drive labeled, for Isabella. Only if they come for you. I didn't sleep. How could I? The USB drive sat on my nightstand like a time bomb, Edward's final words, waiting to explode whatever remained of my parents' carefully constructed lies. At 3 a.m., I finally plugged it into my laptop. The video player opened. Edward appeared on screen, sitting in what I recognized as his study, looking frail but determined. The date stamp read 3 weeks before his death. Isabella. His voice cracked slightly, but his eyes were clear. If you're watching this, they've tried to take what's yours. I'm not surprised. I knew my son, your father, well enough to expect it. I pressed pause, tears already blurring my vision. Hearing his voice, seeing his face, it was like meeting him for the first time and saying goodbye simultaneously. I pressed play. I need you to understand something. Charles has been embezzling from the family company for 15 years. I discovered it by accident in 2010, and I've been quietly documenting it ever since. I never exposed him publicly because Linda threatened to keep you from me forever if I did. She had lawyers, influence, and I was a coward who chose a hollow peace over justice. The screen changed to show scanned documents, bank transfers, falsified invoices, offshore accounts, everything methodically labeled and dated. Edward's face returned. He blamed my illness for company losses, told investors I was mentally declining and making poor decisions. It was all lies to cover his theft. By the time I had the courage to disown him privately, he'd already poisoned you against me, and I'd lost decades I can never recover. His hand trembled as he held up a piece of paper. This is his signature on a false medical report he filed to have me declared incompetent last year. I stopped him then, but I knew he'd try again after I was gone. The signature on any medical documents they present in court, compare them carefully. Charles learned to forge my writing years ago. The video continued for 20 more minutes. Edward meticulously explained each piece of evidence, each lie, each betrayal. He spoke directly to the camera, to me, as if we were finally having the conversation stolen from us. You are the only one in this family with my integrity, Isabella. You chose poverty over compromise, art over greed, truth over comfort. Never doubt that. Never let them convince you that you're less than extraordinary. The video ended with Edward's tired smile. Give them hell, sweetheart. I'll be cheering from wherever I end up. The screen went dark. I called Mr. Turner at dawn, apologies for the hour forgotten in my urgency. I have something, everything, but we need to be strategic. Victoria will challenge its authenticity. We spent the morning with a forensic video analyst who confirmed the file's metadata matched Edward's computer, the timestamps were genuine, and there was no evidence of manipulation. By afternoon, we had a court-certified authentication, but Turner held my arm before we entered the courthouse. Isabella, if we show this, there's no going back. Your parents could face criminal charges, fraud, embezzlement, maybe more. This isn't just about the inheritance anymore. They chose this path, I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. They could have let me have what Edward wanted me to have. They could have walked away, but they're here trying to destroy me one more time. I'm done protecting them. The courtroom was packed that afternoon. News of new evidence had leaked, and reporters filled every available seat. Judge Whittaker looked exhausted, shadows under his eyes suggesting he'd slept as poorly as I had. When our eyes met, something passed between us, an understanding, maybe, or a shared grief for a man we'd both lost. Mr. Turner, the judge said, you indicated you have new evidence to present. Yes, Your Honor. We'd like to call a witness first, Mrs. Emily Clean. Victoria shot to her feet. Objection. This witness was not on the disclosed list. Mrs. Clean only came forward yesterday, Your Honor. Given the sensitive nature of her testimony, we asked the court's indulgence. Judge Whittaker considered, his fingers drumming once on the bench. I'll allow it, but Mr. Turner, no more surprises. Mrs. Clean took the stand with quiet dignity. Turner walked her through her 30 years of service to Edward, establishing her credibility before dropping the bomb. Mrs. Clean, did you ever witness the defendant's parents, Charles and Linda Grant, interfering with communications between Edward Grant and his granddaughter? Yes. Her voice carried clearly. Mrs. Linda Grant burned approximately 50 letters over the years, birthday cards, Christmas presents, letters where Mr. Edward begged Isabella to contact him. She burned them all and threatened my job if I told anyone. The courtroom erupted. Judge Whittaker's gavel rang out repeatedly. That's a lie. Linda shrieked, half rising from her seat. She's a bitter old woman who, Mrs. Grant, the judge's voice cut like ice. You will remain silent, or I will hold you in contempt. Turner presented the photographs Mrs. Clean had taken, each one timestamped and geotagged. Victoria fought hard, challenging their authenticity, but forensic analysis backed them up. Then came the video. Your Honor, we'd like to present recorded testimony from Edward Grant himself, made 3 weeks before his death. I watched my parents' faces as Edward's voice filled the courtroom. Linda went white. Charles's hands clenched into fists, his jaw working silently. The documents Edward referenced appeared on screen, bank transfers clearly showing Charles's signature, offshore accounts, falsified reports. Each piece of evidence methodically destroyed the case they'd built. When Edward's voice said, "You are the only one in this family with my integrity, Isabella," I had to close my eyes against the tears. The video ended. Silence fell like snow, thick and suffocating. Judge Whittaker's voice was barely above a whisper. We'll take a 30-minute recess. In the hallway, chaos erupted. Reporters mobbed us with questions. Victoria Hale cornered my parents in an alcove, her voice low and furious. I caught fragments, criminal charges, should have told me. I can't defend this. Mrs. Clean squeezed my hand. He'd be proud of you. Nora appeared with coffee and fierce pride in her eyes. You did it. Not yet, I said, watching my parents through the crowd. They looked cornered, desperate, and that made them dangerous. When court reconvened, Victoria's mask had slipped. She looked shaken, professional veneer cracked. Your Honor, in light of this new evidence, my client's request a continuance, denied. Judge Whittaker's voice was sharp. This court has seen enough delays. Mr. Turner, do you have anything further? Just one thing, Your Honor. Turner pulled out the falsified medical report Victoria had submitted weeks ago, the one claiming Edward's incompetence. He projected it beside a genuine document bearing Edward's signature from the video. Note the signature, Your Honor. The flourish on the G, the slant of the E, these are different people's handwriting. Another analyst took the stand, confirming what was obvious to anyone looking. Furthermore, Turner continued, his voice building, the physician allegedly signing this report, Dr. Richard Payton, died in 2023, 2 years before this exam supposedly took place. The courtroom exploded again. This time, even the judge looked shocked. Miss Hale, can you explain this? Victoria looked at my parents, betrayal and fury warring on her face. I cannot, Your Honor. I was provided these documents by my clients and trusted their authenticity. She took a breath. I move to withdraw from this case. Motion granted. Judge Whitaker's eyes had gone cold. Mr. and Mrs. Grant, you will remain in this courtroom. Bailiff, please ensure they don't leave. My father finally spoke, his voice tight with rage. This is a setup. That video could be doctored. The documents could be, Mr. Grant, the judge's voice could have frozen fire. You have the right to remain silent, and I strongly encourage you to exercise it. This court is calling for a criminal investigation into potential fraud, forgery, and perjury. In the meantime, regarding the matter of Edward Grant's will, he paused, his eyes finding mine across the courtroom. In that moment, I saw the weight he carried, the secrets he bore, the truth he was only beginning to understand. Court is adjourned until tomorrow morning, at which time I will deliver my final ruling. That night, a courier arrived at my apartment. Inside the envelope was a single piece of paper, a DNA test from a private lab. Sample A, Edward Grant, deceased. Sample B, Henry Whitaker. Probability of paternity, 99.98%. And beneath it, a handwritten note in unfamiliar script, tomorrow everything changes for both of us. The DNA report sat on my coffee table like a live grenade. I'd read it 17 times, each number searing itself deeper into my brain. Judge Henry Whitaker was Edward's son, my uncle. The man presiding over my grandfather's estate had no idea he was ruling on his own father's legacy. My hand shook as I reached for my phone. This changed everything. If I revealed it, the case could be dismissed, delayed for months while a new judge was assigned. My parents would have time to regroup, find new lies, new angles of attack. But if I stayed silent and someone else discovered it, I'd look complicit in hiding evidence. The ethical tightrope stretched before me, fraying at both ends. At 2 a.m., my phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number, Cafe Monarch, 7 a.m. Come alone. HW. He knew somehow. Judge Whitaker knew. The cafe was nearly empty when I arrived, steam from espresso machines creating ghostly curtains in the early light. Judge Whitaker sat in the corner, dressed in civilian clothes, jeans and a worn sweater, looking more human than I'd ever seen him. His eyes found mine, and I saw the weight of sleepless nights mirrored there. You received something, he said as I sat, not a question. I slid the envelope across the table. He opened it with steady hands, but I watched his face crumble as he read. The professional mask he wore in court dissolved, leaving raw grief and confusion. I knew Edward, he finally whispered. My mother worked for him. She told me my father was a powerful man who'd made a terrible mistake, that knowing his name would only cause pain. I spent 46 years imagining who he might be, and never once, his voice broke. He wrote about you, I said gently, pulling out Edward's diary. Every achievement, every milestone, he was proud of you, even from a distance. Henry's fingers trembled as he turned the pages, reading his father's secret love letter written across decades. Tears fell silently onto the yellowed paper. Why didn't he tell me? The question was barely audible. He was afraid of scandal, of his wife's family, of destroying your mother's life further. He was a coward, his words, not mine. But he loved you. And he tried in the end to make things right. We sat in silence, two strangers bound by blood and secrets, grieving a man we'd both lost in different ways. What are you going to do? Henry finally asked, gesturing to the DNA report. I don't know. If I reveal this, it delays everything. If I don't, you risk looking like you hid evidence. He closed the diary carefully. Isabella, I have to recuse myself. It's the only ethical choice. They'll destroy me while we wait for a new judge. Maybe. Or maybe the truth is already too visible for them to hide. He met my eyes. I'll file the recusal tomorrow morning. But first, I need to know, do you believe Edward was of sound mind when he made that will? Yes. So do I. He stood, leaving cash for the coffee. Your parents will not stop until they have nothing left to lose. Be careful. That evening, as I walked home through the October twilight, my phone rang. Linda's number flashed on the screen. Against my better judgment, I answered. Isabella. Her voice was silk over steel. We need to talk, just us. Your father doesn't need to know. I have nothing to say to you. $10 million. The number hung in the air. Walk away from this circus. Take the money, disappear, and let this family move on with dignity. Dignity? I laughed bitterly. You burned his letters. You stole 20 years of my relationship with him. And you're talking about dignity? You self-righteous little, she caught herself. Everything we did was to protect you from his instability. He was obsessed with you, Isabella. It was unhealthy. He loved me, something you've never understood. Love. Her voice turned vicious. Is that what you call abandoning your own parents? Choosing poverty and pride over family? You're just like him, stubborn, sanctimonious, and completely alone. At least I can sleep at night. I hung up, my heart pounding. But her words burrowed deep, finding old wounds. Was I alone? Edward was dead. Henry was a stranger. And my parents, they'd never been parents at all. Nora found me at my apartment an hour later, Chinese takeout in hand and determination in her eyes. Stop spiraling, she ordered, unpacking containers. I can see it on your face. Whatever your mother said, she offered me $10 million to walk away. And you told her to shove it, right? When I nodded, she grinned. That's my girl. Now eat. Because I found something. She pulled out her laptop, opening a file. Remember the doctor's assistant who helped forge those medical records? I tracked her down. Her name's Jennifer Morse, and she's drowning in guilt. She wants to testify. Why would she risk that? Because Linda threatened her kid, told her if she didn't cooperate, she'd make sure Jennifer lost custody. The woman's been terrified, but now that the fraud's exposed, she realizes she has nothing left to lose by telling the truth. Hope flickered in my chest. Can we trust her? I think so. She has texts, recordings, everything. She kept insurance in case Linda turned on her. Nora squeezed my hand. We're going to win this, Bella. But that night, another message arrived, anonymous like before, but the threat was crystal clear. Step away from this case or everyone will know the truth about your bloodline. The judge's secret won't stay buried. Neither will yours. I stared at the words, ice flooding my veins. What secret could I possibly have? Unless they'd found something about my birth, my adoption papers, something I didn't even know myself. Judge Whitaker's recusal hearing was scheduled for 9 a.m. I arrived early, nerves stretched thin, to find him waiting in an empty hallway. I received a threat last night, I said without preamble, showing him the message. His jaw tightened. So did I. Someone knows about the DNA test. How is that possible? The lab was private, confidential. Someone's been following this case very closely. Following us? He glanced around the empty corridor. Isabella, if I recuse now, it looks like we're hiding something. If I don't, I'm violating judicial ethics. What are you going to do? The right thing. Even if it costs me everything. He straightened his tie, the judge's mask sliding back into place. But I want you to know, regardless of what happens today, Edward chose well. You have his courage. The courtroom filled quickly. News of a morning hearing had drawn every reporter in the city. My parents arrived with a new lawyer, a bulldog named Marcus Reed, known for scorched earth tactics. Judge Whitaker took the bench, his face carved from stone. Before we proceed, I have an announcement. His voice carried to every corner. It has come to my attention that I may have a personal connection to this case that requires my recusal. In the interest of transparency and judicial integrity, Your Honor, Marcus Reed shot to his feet. If you're referring to unsubstantiated rumors about your parentage, I must object. This appears to be a delay tactic by the defense. My blood ran cold. They knew. Of course they knew. Mr. Reed. The judge's voice could have cut glass. I suggest you sit down before you find yourself in contempt. Your Honor, my clients have reason to believe that you were manipulated into presiding over this case precisely because of an alleged family connection, that the entire will was orchestrated to. That's enough. Judge Whittaker stood, and the room fell silent. Yes, I have recently learned that Edward Grant was my biological father. I learned this 2 days ago through a private DNA test. I had no knowledge of this connection when I accepted this case, and I am now formally recusing myself to avoid any appearance of impropriety. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Camera flashes exploded. I sat frozen, watching my uncle sacrifice his reputation for the truth. However, he continued, voice rising above the chaos, before I step down, I want to state clearly and for the record, the evidence presented in this case speaks for itself. Edward Grant was demonstrably of sound mind. The documents contesting that fact have been proven fraudulent. While I cannot deliver a ruling, I can say with absolute certainty that justice demands a thorough investigation into the actions of Charles and Linda Grant. He looked directly at my parents, and his expression was merciless. You tried to steal from your own daughter. You forged documents, committed perjury, and destroyed evidence of a dying man's love. Whether or not I am biased by blood, I am biased toward truth. And the truth is, you deserve everything that's coming. His gavel came down one final time. This case will be reassigned to Judge Patricia Chambers. Court adjourned. The media frenzy outside was apocalyptic. Henry, I could think of him as Henry now, was mobbed by reporters. I tried to reach him, but security pulled me toward a side exit. That's when I heard my mother's voice, shrill with rage. She planned this. That manipulative, a hand clamped over her mouth, Charles's damage control kicking in even as their world collapsed. Back at my apartment, I watched the news coverage with Nora. Every channel carried the story, Judge reveals secret parentage in $1 million inheritance case. Henry's face was everywhere, his private pain now public spectacle. My phone buzzed, a text from Henry, no regrets. The truth matters more than my reputation. Are you okay? I typed back, are you? His response came quickly, for the first time in my life, I know where I come from. That's worth everything, but the threats didn't stop. That night, someone leaked my address to the tabloids. By morning, photographers camped on my doorstep. My phone rang constantly with interview requests, accusations, and worse. Then Nora called, breathless with excitement. Jennifer Morse wants to meet today. She's ready to testify, but she needs immunity first. Mr. Turner arranged a meeting with the DA's office. Jennifer was younger than I'd expected, tired eyes and nervous hands clutching a folder thick with evidence. I didn't want to do it, she said, voice shaking. But Mrs. Grant said if I didn't help, she'd call child services, make up stories about my parenting. I'm a single mom, and I was terrified. What exactly did she ask you to do? The DA, a sharp woman named Sarah Chen, leaned forward. Forge medical records showing Mr. Grant had dementia. She gave me his signature to copy, his medical history to alter. She said it was to protect the family from a gold digger. Jennifer looked at me, guilt written across her face. I'm so sorry. You have proof of this? Chen asked. Jennifer opened the folder. Inside were text messages from Linda, voice recordings of their conversations, even a check stub for $50,000 labeled consulting fee. I kept everything, Jennifer said. I knew if I didn't, she'd destroy me anyway. Chen's smile was razor sharp. Miss Morse, in exchange for your full cooperation and testimony, the DA's office is prepared to offer you immunity. Mr. and Mrs. Grant, however, will face charges of fraud, forgery, perjury, and witness intimidation. The reassignment to Judge Chambers happened quickly. She was in her 60s with a reputation for no-nonsense efficiency and a particular hatred of wealthy defendants who thought they were above the law. The trial resumed 3 days later. The courtroom was still packed, but the energy had shifted. My parents no longer looked confident, they looked cornered. Judge Chambers wasted no time. I've reviewed the case files, including the evidence of forgery and perjury. Mr. Reed, I suggest your clients consider a plea arrangement because if this goes to trial, they're facing serious prison time. Marcus Reed looked like he'd aged a decade. Your Honor, my clients maintain, your clients are liars, Chambers interrupted flatly. I've seen the texts, the recordings, the forged documents. The only question now is whether they want to make this harder on themselves. Charles and Linda whispered frantically. Linda was crying, mascara running down her face. Charles looked like he wanted to hit someone. We need time to consult, Reed finally managed. You have 24 hours. This court will reconvene tomorrow at 9. Her gavel came down like thunder. That evening, as I walked through Central Park trying to clear my head, I found Henry sitting on a bench by the lake. He looked peaceful for the first time since I'd met him. How are you holding up? I asked, sitting beside him. Surprisingly well. Turns out being freed from a secret is better than carrying it. He smiled sadly. I spoke with my mother this morning. She's been in a care facility in Vermont, early onset Alzheimer's. She barely remembers Edward, but when I told her about you, she smiled and said, he always wanted a little girl. Tears pricked my eyes. I wish I could have known her. Maybe we'll visit together sometime. Family should know family. He looked at me carefully. That threat you received about a secret in your bloodline, did you ever find out what they meant? No, I'd been too afraid to look. Want help looking? We went to my apartment and spent hours combing through records, birth certificates, adoption papers, family trees, and then, buried in Edward's diary, we found an entry from the year I was born. Charles's wife gave birth today, a girl. Linda seemed distant, but Charles was overjoyed, though I wonder. The timing seems off. Linda was traveling extensively 9 months ago. But perhaps I'm imagining shadows where there are none. Henry and I looked at each other. He suspected you weren't Charles's biological daughter, Henry said slowly. But he never knew for sure. I felt dizzy. Is that the secret they're threatening me with? There's only one way to find out. The DNA test took 3 days, 3 days of waiting, wondering, questioning everything I thought I knew about myself. If Charles wasn't my father, who was, and did it even matter? The morning of the final hearing, the results arrived. I stood in my apartment, envelope in hand, knowing that whatever was inside would change my understanding of myself forever. I opened it. Charles Grant, 0% probability of paternity. The room spun. I sat down hard, the paper fluttering from my fingers. 28 years of my life built on a lie. You okay? Nora had stayed over, knowing I'd need support regardless of the results. He's not my father, I whispered. Charles isn't my father. She wrapped her arms around me as I cried, not from grief, but from a strange, disorienting relief. The man who'd abandoned me, who'd mocked me, who'd sued me for my inheritance, he wasn't my father. I'd never belonged to him at all. Does it say who is? Nora asked gently. I shook my head. Just that Charles isn't. The rest I'll have to find out another way. Later, she said firmly. Right now, you have a trial to win. The courthouse steps were a war zone of cameras and microphones. I pushed through, Mr. Turner clearing a path. Inside, the courtroom was electric with anticipation. Everyone knew today would be the final day. My parents looked destroyed. Linda's designer clothes couldn't hide her trembling hands. Charles stared straight ahead, his face a mask of barely controlled rage. Judge Chambers entered, and we all rose. We'll begin with closing arguments, she announced. Mr. Turner. Turner stood, and I'd never seen him look so confident. Your Honor, this case has revealed itself to be exactly what Edward Grant warned of in his video, an attempt by greedy, manipulative individuals to steal what was rightfully bequeathed to someone they'd spent years trying to erase. We've proven forgery, perjury, witness tampering, and destruction of correspondence. The only question remaining is how severely the court will punish these actions. Marcus Reed's counter was weak, grasping at straws. He tried to paint my parents as victims of a manipulative old man and a vengeful daughter, but even he seemed to know it was hopeless. Then Mr. Turner delivered the final blow. Your Honor, I'd like to play the full version of Edward Grant's video testimony. The court has seen portions, but not all. The screens lit up. Edward's face appeared, and the courtroom fell silent. This version was longer, more personal. Edward detailed every instance of Charles's embezzlement, every lie Linda had told, every letter they'd destroyed. And then came the part that made my mother gasp aloud. I know Charles isn't Isabella's biological father, Edward said calmly. I've known since she was born. Linda's affair with my business partner, James Mitchell, was an open secret in our circles. But I loved Isabella regardless because she deserved love, not judgment. Charles never knew, or never admitted to knowing. But I won't let him pretend she's his daughter now when it's convenient. The courtroom exploded. Charles lunged to his feet, face purple with rage. That's a lie. That senile old Mr. Grant. Judge Chambers's voice cut through the chaos. Sit down immediately. But Charles was beyond reason. 28 years of secrets, of pretending, of knowing his wife had betrayed him, it all came pouring out. You think I didn't know? He shouted at Linda. You think I didn't know she wasn't mine? I raised her anyway, and this is how she repays me? You raised me? I stood, voice shaking with fury. You ignored me. You called me worthless. You abandoned me when I was 18 and told me I was dead to you. Because you were never really mine. The words hung in the air, ugly and final. Judge Chambers's gavel slammed down repeatedly. Order. Security, remove Mr. Grant from this courtroom. As officers approached, Linda broke down completely, sobbing into her hands. Charles fought against the guards, still shouting about betrayal and ingratitude until they finally wrestled him out the doors. In the sudden silence, Judge Chambers looked at me with something like sympathy. Miss Grant, I believe you've suffered enough. This court finds that Edward Grant's will is valid, properly executed, and represents his clear intentions. The contested claims are dismissed entirely. She turned to Linda, who'd stopped crying and was staring at nothing. Mrs. Grant, you and your husband will face criminal charges for fraud, forgery, and perjury. I'm issuing warrants for your arrests immediately. Security moved toward Linda, who stood mechanically, her face blank. As they led her past me, she stopped. For just a moment, our eyes met. I saw no love there, no regret, just empty resignation. You always did ruin everything, she whispered. Goodbye, Mom, I said quietly. Goodbye, Dad. The doors closed behind them, and I felt something break loose in my chest, not grief, exactly, but release. The weight of their judgment, their expectations, their cruelty, all of it fell away like chains I'd carried so long I'd forgotten I was wearing them. Outside, Henry waited by his car. He'd come to watch the final proceedings from the back row, a silent show of support. It's over, I said, still feeling numb. No, he smiled gently. Now it begins, the real life, the one Edward wanted for you. I don't even know who I am anymore. Charles isn't my father. Linda barely qualified as a mother. Edward's gone. I'm just floating. You're Isabella Grant, Henry said firmly. Granddaughter of Edward Grant, niece of Henry Whitaker, artist, survivor, and the person brave enough to choose truth over money. He hesitated, then added, and if you want family, real family, not the kind that's obligated by blood, but the kind that chooses each other. I looked at this man, my uncle, my unexpected ally, my family, and felt tears slip down my face. I'd like that, I whispered. The scandal consumed the news cycle for weeks. Charles and Linda Grant, once pillars of New York society, were arrested on multiple charges. Their trial was set for the following spring, but their lawyers were already negotiating plea deals. They'd lost everything, reputation, freedom, and any remaining shred of dignity. I felt nothing watching their downfall, not satisfaction, not vindication, just a tired, hollow relief that it was finally over. The inheritance itself was staggering. Edward's estate included properties, investments, and the family companies controlling shares. Mr. Turner walked me through it all. But the numbers felt abstract, meaningless. What am I supposed to do with all this? I asked, standing in Edward's mansion for the first time. It was beautiful, old-world elegance mixed with comfortable warmth. But it felt like a museum to a life I'd never known. Whatever you want, Turner said gently. That's the point. Edward wanted you to be free. I left the mansion untouched for 2 months. I couldn't bear to live there yet, surrounded by a grandfather I'd barely known. Instead, I kept working from my little Brooklyn apartment, taking freelance design projects, living the life I'd built for myself. But one November morning, I received a package. Inside was a letter in Edward's handwriting, another one, sealed and dated from years before his death. Isabella, if you're reading this, you've won. I knew you would because you have something Charles never had, integrity. But winning isn't the end, sweetheart. It's the beginning. I'm leaving you more than money. I'm leaving you choices, the choice to live how you want, to pursue your art without fear, to build a family on your own terms. But most importantly, I'm leaving you the choice to forgive. Not them, they don't deserve it. Forgive yourself for the years you spent feeling unwanted, for believing you weren't enough, for carrying shame that was never yours to bear. You were always enough. You were always exactly who you were meant to be. Family isn't defined by blood, but by those who choose truth when it's hardest. You've proven yourself worthy of that truth. Now go live in it. All my love, Grandfather Edward. I read it 3 times, then called Henry. Want to help me plant a tree? He arrived an hour later, and together we drove to the Grant estate. The gardens were overgrown but beautiful, wild in a way that felt fitting. We planted an oak sapling next to the old tree Edward had planted for my grandmother decades ago. 2 trees, 2 generations, 2 people Edward had loved but couldn't protect the way he'd wanted. He would have liked this, Henry said, patting down the soil. Tell me about your mother, I asked. The real story, not the rumors. Henry smiled sadly. She was kind, strong. She loved Edward desperately but understood why he couldn't claim me. When his wife's family threatened to destroy her, she disappeared to protect me. Raised me alone, worked 3 jobs, never complained. She taught me that integrity matters more than comfort. That's where you get it from. And you got it from Edward. We're both his legacy, Isabella, different circumstances, same core. Over the following weeks, I started spending time at the mansion, not living there yet, but learning it. I discovered Edward's study filled with books on art and architecture, the same subjects I'd secretly loved as a child. His desk drawer held sketches I'd made in high school that he'd somehow acquired. He'd kept everything, every tiny piece of me he could gather. Mrs. Clean visited often, sharing stories about Edward, how he'd watched me from afar at my high school graduation, how he'd anonymously funded a scholarship I'd won for art school. I'd thought I'd earned it on merit, never knowing he'd made sure I had the chance. He called you his best investment, Mrs. Clean said, smiling through tears. Not because of money, but because you were proof that goodness could survive even the worst circumstances. Nora published her article in December, The Heiress Who Chose Integrity Over Gold. It wasn't sensational or tabloid style. Instead, she wrote about the cost of greed, the power of truth, and the radical act of choosing authenticity over acceptance. The piece went viral for its humanity. And suddenly, I wasn't just a story, I was a symbol. Messages poured in from people sharing their own stories of family betrayal, of choosing difficult truths over comfortable lies. I read every one, crying over the shared pain and the collective courage. On Christmas Eve, I organized a small memorial for Edward. Henry came, bringing his mother from the care facility. She didn't remember much, but when I introduced myself as Edward's granddaughter, she smiled and said, "He talked about you. In his sleep, he'd say your name." We lit candles in the garden, standing beside the 2 trees. Henry read from Edward's diary, the entries about us, his secret children, the loves he'd carried in silence. When it was my turn to speak, I found words I didn't know I had. I never met you, grandfather, not really. But you'd been with me every day of my life, in the books you sent, the scholarships you funded, the faith you kept when no one else did. You taught me that family isn't who raises you. It's who believes in you, even when you can't believe in yourself. I pulled out the pocket watch Mrs. Clean had given me. Edward's watch, engraved with truth, finds its own heirs. I understand now, I continued, voice breaking. The inheritance wasn't money. It was permission to be exactly who I am without apology. You gave that to both of us. I looked at Henry, who was crying openly. You gave us each other, and that's worth more than any fortune. Later, as snow began to fall, Henry and I sat in Edward's study, surrounded by his books and memories. What will you do with all of this? He asked, gesturing to the mansion, the estate, the legacy. I've been thinking about that. I pulled out sketches I'd been working on. I want to turn the mansion into an arts foundation, free studios for young artists who can't afford them, scholarships for kids whose families don't support their dreams. A place where creativity matters more than money. Henry's smile was radiant. Edward would love that. And you? I asked. What will you do now? I've been offered a position on the appellate court, teaching judicial ethics. He laughed softly. Apparently, my brave stand for transparency made me desirable. You deserve it, every bit of it. We sat in comfortable silence, watching snow blanket the gardens, 2 broken families, 2 hidden children, 2 people who'd found each other through loss and built something better from the pieces. My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. This is James Mitchell. I saw the news. If you want to know about your biological father, I'm willing to meet. I showed Henry, who squeezed my hand. Do you want to? I thought about it, another secret, another revelation, another chance to redefine who I was. But looking around Edward's study, at the life I was building, at the family I'd chosen, I realized I already knew who I was. Maybe someday, I said, setting the phone aside. But right now, I have everything I need. Later that night, standing alone in the garden, I whispered to the darkness, to Edward, to whatever piece of him remained in this place he'd loved. Thank you for seeing me when no one else did, for fighting for me in the only way you knew how, for teaching me that truth matters more than comfort and that integrity is the only inheritance worth having. The wind rustled through the trees, the old one Edward had planted for his first love, the new one we'd planted for his legacy. And in that moment, I finally understood what Edward had been trying to tell me all along. They'd wanted my inheritance, the money, the power, the grand name. But I'd found something richer, something they could never take or destroy or diminish, my truth, my peace, my family, not the one I was born into, but the one I'd chosen, built from honesty and courage and love that demanded nothing but presence. The mansion lights glowed warm behind me. Inside, Henry was making tea. Mrs. Clean was sorting through old photographs. And Nora was documenting everything for posterity. My family, real family, the kind that chooses you back. I touched the oak sapling's tender branches and smiled. Now we start again, grandfather, together. The snow fell softer now, covering the old wounds, blanketing the past in white. And for the first time in 28 years, I felt like I'd finally come home.